Sound speeds, and welcome to the Speed Bumps Podcast, Episode 2. Now, if you missed the first episode, this is basically a podcast that I record on my drive home from set. And after a 10, 12, 14, however many hour day it is, I have a commute. And usually I'm pretty amped up or overly tired. And either way, one of the things I often am faced with is having to respond to viewer questions. I could just ignore them, but I usually like to be helpful and informative, putting my expertise to use. Now, the more complex questions, sometimes I've ended up saying, can I give you a call or a video call or something along those lines? But many times it's usually a pretty simple thing that I can respond via text. But who wants to go home after working that kind of a schedule and write a bunch of emails? I certainly don't, especially when it's one of those things where I could easily respond by voice. So I'm going to do this podcast by voice to benefit you, the viewer. And if you have a question you'd like to submit, please email me at the email address down in the description. But for right now, let's find out what the question is that I answered this episode. Just got a Sennheiser EWD-SK wireless system, and the manual is very confusing as I've never worked with wireless audio. Please help me figure out how to properly use it with my RME UCX2 audio interface. I use DPA 6066 headset mic, and I made a 1 meter XLR cable, Neutrik male and female XLR3 Canary L4E6S, which I use to connect EWD to the microphone XLR port of my interface. The AF gain, AF out description in the manual is very confusing. Here's a link to the manual. Do I set the gain on the transmitter and receiver as low as possible and increase the gain on the preamp on the interface? Bonus question. How do I level match two mics, 6066 and the SM7B? Do I just look at the meters while speaking into both mics, adjusting the gain until the levels match? Another question would be, how do you mic very quiet sources like whispering when the signal is very low without getting preamp hiss? To summarize your first question, it's about gain staging. Now, gain staging is basically setting a level at every single point where you can adjust a level, starting at your microphone end and going all the way up your signal chain to this to the recorder, mixer, or your interface. And what you want to do is properly set it is set your gain at the microphone end first. Once you set it at the transmitter, it's going to transmit correctly. And then you set your output gain on your receiver correctly, then your input level on the next device, and so forth up the chain. The reason you do this is because if you clip the microphone on the transmitter at the preamp, then it's going to be clipped the entire signal chain up the way, and it's never going to sound good. If it's too low in volume, that's basically going to have too much noise to your signal. The simplest way for me to put this is the signal to noise ratio, you want to balance the gain to the noise floor. The way you do this properly is by setting your levels to peak at about negative 12 dB. The reason you usually choose that level is because anything lower than that, like negative 15, negative 18, is going to be too much noise. It's going to be too low. Keeping in mind that every 6 dB is basically a doubling or a cut of half of the signals, of half of the volume. So if 0 dB is your peak level, negative 6 dB would be half of that. Negative 6 dB below that would be a quarter of that. And then by the time you go to negative 18 dB, you're at an eighth of that level. Now, if your noise floor is, let's say, here, and your signal is here, that's a very little difference between the signal and the noise. So it's going to be a very noisy recording because you're never going to be able to recover that. Granted, it also works the other way. If you blast it, you crank it up all the way, yes, your noise level does come up, but what that's going to do is increase the signal as well. And when it's closest to being all the way open, that's when your preamps are going to be the very cleanest. And the reason why is because sound is logarithmic. The decibel scale that you use for adjusting your levels is logarithmic. So the difference between negative 60 dB and negative 50 dB is only a little bit. Negative 50 and negative 40 is a little bit more. Negative 40 to negative 30 is more. Then 20, then 10, and then all the way up to 0. And so by the time you get to 0 dB, the difference between 0 dB and negative 1 dB is greater than the amount of volume change between negative 60 dB and negative 50 dB. So you want to keep in mind that if you don't set your level correctly to peak at negative 12 dB, then it's not going to be correct anywhere else. Now, the reason I'm saying set it for negative 12, even though some people will say set it for negative 15, negative 18, is because we're talking about a wireless microphone. Usually the noise level is up higher than that, and there's a lot of compression involved. So if you set it too low, you're going to be in that background noise way too much, and it's going to be more difficult for you to recover the lav and make it sound good on the other end. So usually set your peaks for around negative 12 dB unless there's a reason for you to do otherwise, and you're probably going to be okay. Now, I'm not familiar with those 3 settings going out of your receiver. What I would say is set your levels for negative 12 dB and then listen to them and see how they sound. That's going to be able to give you the very best possible result going out. Then go to your next gain stage. Now, the way you would do that is obviously you would connect up your headphones or look at your transmitter and set it to negative 12 dB until your levels peak there. Then monitor your receiver out. Listen to where your receiver and how that sounds, where it seems the very best. It's probably going to be somewhere around line level at 0 dB. It may be hotter, maybe less. And so you might want to adjust it and play with it and then see at that point what your best level is going to be on your interface that you're connected up to, because some receivers will be, if you set the level at 0 dB, it's going to give you the very best possible output level. If you set it too low, then let's say negative 6 dB or negative 12 dB, and then you boost it up by adding 12 dB at the interface is going to be cleaner. And so they're usually going to be cleaner than your receiver output. So if you set the receiver output too low and then boost it on the interface mixer or recorder, then it's going to be too low of a signal to noise ratio again. And even though your level was good, your receiver output noise level is going to be too high. So you might want to try it at 0 dB first, line level out, not mic level, because mic level is going to basically be taking your microphone going into the preamp of your transmitter, then converting that into a line level and then turning it back into mic level just so that way you could boost it again later. Makes no sense. Go line level out of your receiver always. Now, so once you go out of your receiver, monitor it there, make sure it sounds at the very, very best, and run a few tests. You know, when you go at 0 dB out versus 6 dB out versus plus 12 dB out, and then just adjust on your interface, because it is better for you to do that, because usually your receivers are going to be noisier than the preamps on your mixer, recorder, or interface. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight with regards to your gain staging question. The second part of your question is how to level match properly a DPA 6066 headset lav and a Shure SM7B. Now, you're talking about 2 totally different types of microphones. Now, it would be very easiest for me to say gain stage both of them correctly and then simply bring them both up, the same amount and then match them visually. But then that's not really to your ears, is it? Because an SM7B is a more bassy microphone than a 6066 would be. And so if the low end is more so on the darker microphone, which is an SM7B, if you set it by level, then it's not going to match correctly. So what you want to do is do it by ear, unless you have something like the waves loudness meter or something that will actually adjust loudness, not the level, but the loudness. Because if you watch my video on how to properly, add decibels and the +3, +6, +10 dB, and when those come into play, then you'll see that there's a different structure that you need to be aware of with regards to +6 dB and +10 dB. That's the difference between loudness and the acoustic vibrations in the air and the way you hear them in your ears, which are basically A-weighted. So if you were to think about this from a perspective of your ears and what sounds like it's the same kind of level, that's what a loudness meter is gonna help you with. So it's like the waves loudness meter. I use that personally. I bought a license to that a few years ago. You could check it out. I'll put a link down in the description. You can click on that and go and check it out. And once you set your levels, basically you grab the same little area and you hit play on both of them. And you adjust the levels until the average loudness meter, the RMS loudness meter, registers the same volume on both of them. That's going to give you a proper level. Now, different softwares do different things differently. Premiere does it differently. DaVinci Resolve does it differently. A whole bunch of different softwares do it differently. But if you use something like Reaper, like I do, then that's going to probably give you a very good result, and it's not very expensive. So when you're talking about level matching 2 different microphones, there's a couple of different thoughts on that. The first one was the one I just explained, level matching to the volume level. But some people will say level match to the background noise level. Problem is you have 2 different mismatched microphones. It's very difficult for you to mix to that because the lav mic is probably going to have a higher noise floor than the SM7B, Or if it happens to be vice versa, depending on how far you are off of the SM7B, then you got to keep in mind if you mash the background noise level so that way that you can mix those levels correctly, then your actual gain is going to be off. So what I would usually recommend to do is if you're going to do something like level match two very different microphones, then make sure you do it by the actual level as opposed to the background noise. Only use the better sounding of the two, which will probably be the SM7B, unless you're moving around. The biggest question I have about this whole entire process that you're going through is you're using a wireless microphone going, a headset, the 6060, going into a wireless transmitter to a receiver, then going into your interface. If you're sitting at your computer or doing something close enough to your interface, why are you going wireless? Why don't you just go straight from your headset, get an adapter to go XLR out, then completely, bypass the wireless situation altogether, and then just go straight into your interface. That way it's going to be a lower noise floor. You're not going to have to deal with wireless, compression, that kind of thing, and your signal is going to be so much better. So there you go. Your third and final question is, how do you mic up quiet sources? Well, the opposite, the way you would if someone were screaming into a microphone. You're not just going to leave your level up and bounce off the limiters, are you? You're going to bring the level down. Or you're going to back off on the microphone, get farther away. That way you're not clipping your meters. Because and actually one of the examples that I could say is probably the person that you most have readily available to here on YouTube that does it the best is probably Banjo Scott from Podcastage. Routinely, he will yell out something on his podcast, get loud, laugh, something like that. If you notice, his mic technique is always spot on. He backs away from the microphone. When he gets loud, he comes up close to it, and then he doesn't speak very loudly sometimes. He'll get even closer up on the microphone. That's proper mic technique. And if you were to speak at a normal volume level into a microphone, you can adjust your volume level accordingly. And if you are going to be speaking very quietly, you need to do exactly the opposite of you would if you were loud, by getting closer to the microphone. Yes, you're going to be engaging that proximity effect when you get close to the microphone, but hey, would you rather be heard or not? You could switch to a quieter microphone if you really want to, but why bother changing microphones just because you go quiet? Get closer to the microphone. If you need to EQ out some of that bass, you can. But the very best way for you to actually mic yourself up if you are going to be talking quietly is by getting closer to the mouth with the microphone. Now, if you're talking about a lavalier microphone, you don't want to necessarily have it on your chest, because if you do, then it may be too far away from your mouth by the time you add in the noise level. So at that point, if you're going to be quiet, bring it up higher. Stick it inside of a collar. Like, this is totally the wrong kind of collar, because this is a shirt that I use for when I do exteriors. Was actually a sun hoodie is what it's called. But anyway, so if I were to lav myself up, I would not necessarily want to put it here because that would be very throaty. What I would do is, obviously, the best situation you have available to you is going to be your headset that goes over an ear and it comes out right there. So your ability to lav yourself up close to your mouth and pick up the whispers is going to be at its very, very best. If I were laving myself up, and this was obviously not going to be very good, because of all this extra, material there, then I would probably try to put it either inside of a collar if I could. Like, I might stick it into my collar here, even though it's I'm not normally a fan of putting a microphone inside of collars, because then it's pointed forwards and you're going to be underneath the chin. So it's something called chin shadow, but it is something that you at least need to be aware of. But I think that wearing a headset with a little microphone right here is going to be your very best possible situation. So bring your level either up and deal with the extra noise floor, or get closer to your microphone. That's basically the best way that you can possibly mic yourself up if you're going to be speaking quietly. So what interesting bit of information am I going to be bringing you in this episode? Well, if you ever shoot in a rural location, you need to be aware of the squeaks on door hinges. Not just spraying them and WD-40ing them and say, cool, it's going to be quiet. No, you can't necessarily do that. You need to get with locations and have them talk to the homeowner, because it may not be that simple. If you spray those hinges, it may very, very badly anger the homeowner. The reason why is because in rural areas, quite often, that is their home security system. It's not one of those things where you open up a door, beep, 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 front door open. They don't do that in rural areas. What they do listen for is the squeak coming from the door hinges. They'll say, oh, that's the front door. Or, oh, wait a minute, who's coming in the back door? Another thing is, they'll listen to the creaking of the wooden deck that's out front their house or the porch. If, for example, their front porch is made out of concrete, their back porch is wood, they'll listen for that. If they hear wood, then they're going to say, someone's coming in the back door, and they're going to listen for that. If someone knocks on the door, they know where they're coming from. And if you go ahead and spray those hinges, it may be good for your ears, but locations may get mad when they talk to that homeowner and they freak out because their door hinges, their security system has been compromised. I know it sounds like a silly thing, but in rural areas, it's a very big deal. So definitely keep that in mind because, oh man, that is something very, very serious. On Walking Dead Season 2, Herschel's house, which if you ever watched the show, you know Herschel lived on a farm. And in that farm, the house that Herschel lived in, they used that method right there. They used the security system was the door squeaks and the wood panels and how creaky the front hinges were on their screen door, that kind of thing. You could not spray them. If you sprayed them, they would get very irate and would not let you back in that location. There are other locations you go to in rural areas that will very much be the same way. So keep in mind that this is a respect thing. You respect the homeowner's property, because if you don't, then locations will have to deal with that, and they're probably going to be a little less interested in giving you something later. So there you have it, episode 2 of Speed Bumps. Now, I'm probably going to have to change up that camera sometime in the future because as much as I love the DJI Pocket 2, it is a 3 gimbal camera. And if it is on my car, every time I make a turn, like right now, it's trying to adjust because it's a 3 gimbal action. It's trying to compensate for the car moves. It may make for a smoother ride, but I mean, it's still going to be floating around. So it's not going to be the very best possible settings. And honestly, you didn't see it, but it took me 35 minutes for the Pocket 2 to calibrate properly and get and set up to my phone. For whatever reason, if you set it up on an angle like the way that it is mounted up to my window right now, it's extremely annoying because it's like, wait a minute, I'm not level. I don't know how to deal with this. And then it doesn't connect up to a phone, even though it's right next to it. So that's incredibly annoying and just... I don't want to have to deal with that anymore. So I'm going to have to come up with a different solution. I like the file sizes, though, on the Pocket 2, but we'll have to figure it out because in episode 1, it was shot at night, and that's not very good for exposure. So I'm going to have to find a good solution for us that we can get a good picture on. But in the meantime, enough rambling. Thank you for watching episode 2 of Speed Bumps, and I will see you in Speed Bumps episode 3.
If you'd like to ask a sound-related question to be answered in a future episode, send text, audio, or video to ssp@soundspeeds.us. Want to record this outro? Fine! Take my job from me. Details in the description down below. Find us on social media and online at www.soundspeeds.us. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more sound-related content.